Recording service. Can everybody see the screen okay? Hope so. All right, so this is New York Eden 101, Extension Disaster Education Network Introduction for CCE Associations. So, you know, a lot of times we get the question after talking about Eden a little bit or doing a sort of presentation in front of a group of people, especially executive directors. There's a few people I can see in the audience that are making eye contact with me and understand what I'm talking about. There's quite a few that have a sort of a little slightly confused look, and there are some that really look like deer in headlights. And I think that's because there's an idea of what Eden used to be, what it's started to become, and what it's becoming, and there's not a lot of clarity on that. So let's take care of that first. Cornell Cooperative Extension's New York Extension Disaster Education Network is a central part of what is a growing statewide extension and applied research program. It's a little informal on the research side, but growing and hopefully formalizing as we speak. And our program is part of a larger national extension disaster education network funded by USDA NIFA, and is also, it's important to point out, an e-extension learning network, which is where the funding from USDA NIFA for National Eden is funneled through. Now, you'll notice throughout this PowerPoint presentation that all these things, acronyms, and otherwise are hyperlinked. So if you want to refer back to some of these resources, you can and go to the appropriate websites. We hope to post the PowerPoint presentation online so that people can access it at their own leisure. And we did talk a little bit about some of this background in a previous webinar describing New York Eden and its relationships in campus-county connections. And there's a link here on this slide to access that webinar as well. And we hope to be putting that webinar up on the New Eden YouTube channel, which we'll send out some information on soon. So there's often the question from some quarters about how relevant disaster is in the extension context. And I put this, it's a little bit of a long quote, sort of a wall of text, I apologize, but it's important to get the gist of what this gentleman is saying. This is Frank Butler, who is the Deputy Administrator for Economic and Community Systems in what was CS Reese, now NIFA. And he says, extension plays a significant role in enabling families and communities and businesses to respond to these kinds of incidents. He points directly to the role of local extension agents as critical nodes of communication. And he says, indeed, in reviewing responses to Katrina, some observed that when extension agents were closely tied to the state's disaster response team, communications flowed much more quickly to affected individuals. This is the perspective of a person from inside. We've received similar sorts of comments from people outside of the extension service or the land grant system, especially in New York State during exercises where FEMA has been the evaluator. They've been very impressed on a number of occasions with the role, the surprisingly helpful role, according to them, that extension can play in terms of disaster preparedness and response. So just wanting to make sure and set the stage a little here on the sort of macro level about disasters in extension, and then bringing it a little closer to home in terms of our own cooperative extension mission. You see that this little scroll is in my mind anyway a pretty nice one kind of definition anyway for this concept of resilience that we hear a lot about these days. And you're all familiar hopefully with our mission, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded about some of the key words and phrases in that mission occasionally. I'm not going to read it out loud now, but we're going to see it in action here in just a little bit. And here's some other items to check in with you on. I'm sure you're aware that disaster is costly, but did you know that up to 40% of businesses affected by a natural or human-caused disaster never reopen? And that an estimated economic damages from all of those disasters in 2011, and we had more in 2012 and probably even more than that in 2013, but in 2011 the figures exceeded $45 billion. And that was 2011 was the year of the billion-dollar disaster, with 12 events, each one exceeding costs of $1 billion or more. And during that same time there were 90 federally declared disasters affecting every region of the United States. So for those that might be skeptical about whether there's any demand for this kind of activity within extension, I would like to present this information and more. Here are some trends in terms of the future of this sort of activity. You see that not only the line on the frequency of billion-dollar disasters is definitely trending upward, but the cumulative costs are also trending up. And that means that not only are disasters more frequent, they're more intense, and they're more costly. So this is important to keep in mind as we think about Eden in the 101 sort of context. And so how does that apply to New York State? In this image, we can see that there are only about 10 counties here that are white, that don't have any shading. And that was as of between 2007 and 2012. So as of 2013 and now 14, I know at least a couple of those counties will be shaded because they did get disaster declarations within the last year and a half. And you know, you can see that shading indicates the number of weather-related disasters in each of those counties. You know, kind of light yellow is 1, and the darker you get towards blue, the more intense the frequency is in those counties. Obviously, to the south along the Hudson River and then into New York City, you see the intensity of the colors growing. Now, this is an important map for all of us involved in Eden. You can go online. If you clicked on this in the PowerPoint, it would take you to the site where this map lives, and then you could actually hover on each of the counties, and it would give you more specific information about the frequency and the types of those disasters for your reference. And again, in New York State, here's a breakdown of disaster types for our region, not just New York State, but for our region. And there's, you know, sort of northeast here. The largest piece of the pie is severe storms. You've got flooding, obviously a huge one. Hurricanes, severe ice storms accounted for some. Fire, cost-wise, there was one incident, but it was pretty expensive in our region. I think that was in the New Jersey Pine Barrens area. And then others, which would include wind events, derechos, small tornadoes, that kind of thing. And then again, pointing back to that frequency, look there where it's circled between 2008 and 2012. You see that trend getting much more steep both on frequency and cumulative costs. So this is just basically to set the stage for what government is saying. The Governor Cuomo has said that we must undertake major reforms to adapt to the reality that storms like Sandy, Irene, and Lee are going to can hit the state at any time. And he's not the only one saying these kinds of things. Mayor of New York City, the Governor of New Jersey, other congressional folks, the White House, everyone in leadership positions, for the most part, is aware that reforms are needed to adapt to these realities. Whatever the discourse is around what you want to blame for that, the reality is the storms are more frequent and more intense. So, given that background, what does Eden do? Well, here's the mission statement. We link extension educators, emergency managers, and community officials to enhance resilience and reduce the impact of disasters in New York communities. And that is about as helpful as a mission statement is. It kind of gets everything there. But it doesn't really drill down like we might like. The diagram shows you how we are, kind of a system within systems. So we take a system of systems approach in that Cornell Cooperative Extension is working with state agencies and federal agencies, but also you could add another wheel there, working with county, municipalities, regional organizations, and so forth. So it's a systems approach regarding disaster in terms of what Eden does. And I am going to now show you a video that explains a little more in depth how we can think of ourselves in terms of what emergency management might mean, and it helps us understand what we are and what we are not in terms of Eden. Let's have a look at that.
They're handled by police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and other responders as routine matters. So what when really bad emergencies need more capability than the individual agencies can provide? That's where emergency managers come in, to coordinate all the agencies. And the bigger the scope of the incident, the more an emergency manager's value increases. Let's look at the worst case example. The largest of all disasters in terms of scale, complexity, and consequences. This is the biggest of all disasters. Imagine some bad guys get a hold of get it into place, and set it off. Confusion, fear. Our society is a complex Rubik's Cube.
Trying to find where we can mute.
First, we get a few emergency managers together in the field or in a room and start working. We find the facts and tell the story. We tell who's in charge, what's happening, is it getting worse or getting better, and what are we doing and what needs to be done. We start to reestablish the connections severed by the blast. In the Emergency Operations Center, we begin to connect people and organizations to the city and to each other. We tell them to connect inside and outside their own organization with the same message. This is what is happening, and what do you see to inform this picture? By doing this, we're creating a new organization that didn't exist before and will never exist again. Imagine this incident organization as a pyramid with 3 distinct levels. At the top is the strategic level, with agency executives, local, state, federal, and elected officials, where political objectives are translated into strategy. At the bottom of the pyramid is the biggest and most important level, the tactical level, or the people who we call boots on the ground. And in the middle is where strategy is translated into effective action, where what we need to get done becomes the how we'll do it. We call this the operational level. This is where the emergency managers sit. Their job is to support everybody, and they everybody everything. Managing resources, getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time, managing consequences, finding and solving problems. But even if you were doing all that, you're still not done. You must tell everyone everything that you're doing all the time. It's critical for the leadership to know the facts so they can convey it to the public. This connection creates trust with the impacted population, and without it, credibility is lost, and our work won't matter. Some experts in government and academia believe that disaster response consists of leadership and the field, and that there's no need for the emergency managers. But the fact is, emergency managers create the incident organization that can manage the catastrophe. Only then can we turn a corner fast enough. Order is not yet restored, but the sensible is possible. The problem is that during a catastrophe, the only thing that doesn't grow quickly enough is the number of emergency managers at the operations level. We simply can't get big enough, fast enough. Keep in your mind this image of a catastrophic incident versus a tiny brake pad. Is this going to be able to manage this job? We have to be able to build this brake pad really big enough, fast enough, so we can create this incident organization and use it as the initiating mechanism for order, the starting point, back to that Rubik's Cube of complexity.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? David, are you able to hear me? So, Dale, are you able to hear? Welcome.
I can hear, but I got background.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that David can figure out a way to get some sound back in his system. I think if Dale you can hear and Lisa you can hear. Now I see Andy. Andy, are you able to hear? Okay, well, I think I'll try to continue on here. So referring back to the mission now, so that video, hopefully I know some of you didn't hear it all, and maybe you can go back and see it again later, but that video does do a very nice job of distinguishing between those first responders and then sort of the executive branch or other sort of branches of government that are involved in disaster response, emergency response. And then they talk specifically about this middle layer, this layer of managers and information exchangers and connectors. And that's kind of the role that Cornell Cooperative Extension and see itself in this context. And so hopefully now the mission of Cornell Cooperative Extension through the lens of that video may make it a little clearer about how we're involved in these kinds of activities. And so to point that out, here is the disaster cycle as it's pretty well accepted in disaster studies and the disaster literature. Starting over on the left, you can see that the cycle sort of begins and ends with prevention, then moving through the cycle to mitigation and preparedness. All of that has to do with capacity building. And then there's that moment, that sort of explosion or perturbation in the system where the disaster occurs. And following that around, you see that there's the immediate response and some assessment going on in immediate relief. All that's the red zone, as I've called it in various writings. And then you move through reconstruction and rehabilitation back through prevention. Now, what I think is interesting about understanding the disaster cycle, especially in the context of cooperative extension, is that we can then re-experience our mission in pretty significant ways. Can you imagine putting knowledge to work in pursuit of economic vitality, ecological sustainability, and social well-being, tracking well with any phase along this disaster cycle? And I think the answer, you will agree, is yes. It seems to make sense in a lot of places in the disaster cycle. I think the same could be said for bringing local experience and research-based solutions together, especially in the capacity building and reconstruction rehabilitation phases, and also helping New York families and communities thrive in a rapidly changing world. Not only thrive, but survive, especially in that red zone there. There's a clear role. So I think it's not a stretch at all. In fact, it's enlightening to see how our Cornell Cooperative Extension mission fits neatly and nicely with the work of Extension Disaster Education and associated programs. So given that, let's get into the nitty-gritty of, so what are we doing and how do we get it done and how can you participate? We serve in two important roles at the same time in terms of our role and capacity during a storm, emergency, or disaster. First, we serve as state or regional incident command leadership within our own system, then the Cornell Cooperative Extension system at a number of different levels. We're supporting higher levels of incident command, that's the state and federal government. At the same time, we're transmitting guidance from higher levels of incident command through our regional and county networks. And so a lot of that, number one, is happening on campus and with the advisory committee once they become activated as a disaster all hazards response team. And the second important role that we're playing simultaneously is acting as a primary source for sector-specific situational information. And at this time, that's mostly in the agriculture and natural resources sectors, but it doesn't need to be contained to that as we grow, expand, and engage in additional training. But at this time, the ag and natural resources sector are where we have a lot of good connections and a lot of visibility for that primary source mission. And so continuing along, so how this all works, how do these various pieces fit together? It's a series of nested sort of systems, as I said, systems within systems, and I'm going to walk you through each of these sort of layers. Obviously, our Cornell Cooperative Extension is interacting with a number of colleges here on campus: agriculture and life sciences, human ecology, industrial labor relations, veterinary medicine, and those colleges have a presence in every county through Cornell Cooperative Extension and in all 5 boroughs in New York City. Within that is sort of this nascent, emergent, all hazards preparedness and response education project. This is an informal title for this. I'm attempting to pull together a number of related initiatives, including our work with the New York State Resiliency Institute for Storms and Emergencies, the work of the Cornell All Hazards Working Group, some of the work that I'm doing with Greening in the Red Zone and the Civic Ecology Lab, and of course, Eden has a role to play in this. So that's within the Cornell Cooperative Extension sphere. Here is Eden within that. And the role of Eden, again, this is a network, Extension Disaster Education Network, disseminating educational materials on emergency preparedness and recovery, providing emergency preparedness training and resources, assisting associations in establishing partnerships and distributing credible resource materials. You can see that it's a section of APREP and a smaller section even of Cornell Cooperative Extension. So it is a targeted mission. And then within that is DART, which you'll only hear about when the bad stuff is going on. This DART means Disaster All Hazards Response Team. It's Cornell Cooperative Extension's standard operating procedures for disasters, and these operating procedures are supposed to be consistent with incident command systems in layers above and below us. So continuing on with an example of how that works to try to explain, let's use a hurricane as an example, since that was the last major declaration that we're still experiencing in recovery mode. Let's just say on a nice fall day, the morning news is telling us that there's a strong tropical depression that's going to hit the Northeast. But we're a few days out, and there's no real clear consensus of the storm's track, but it's possible that New York State could take a hit. So says the news. And so that means we're going to move from what would be a normal state around here and in your communities to a yellow level, a kind of guarded level. And that means a few things are going to start happening in the Eden neighborhood here on campus. And that includes, you'll see from our office here, from state program leadership, an alert to the entire system that there might be a severe weather incident. And then you would see, hopefully, some tailored preparedness guidance to what that incident is. Those messages would come out through the disaster listserv and through the various social media channels that we have for Eden. A second thing that would be going on would be that we would be warning the members of the Eden Advisory Committee and the Cornell Cooperative Extension Director that the Disaster All Hazards Response Team might get activated. So this is just a sort of warning order. And then third, we would begin to open communications with our state partners and the National Extension Disaster Education Network. Now, obviously, we would hope that, we were guarded, we went to yellow, and that nothing was required. We could relax after the storm passed or narrowly missed us, and that would be the end. But often that is not the case. And so, but before we move to that, let's talk about when we go to yellow, what does it mean for an association? What do CCE associations do if we are going on campus to a yellow or guarded status? What should be happening in the counties is that the counties should be determining if you're going to potentially be in or near harm's way, assigning a staff person to become your county Eden point of contact, which we're going to need for that particular incident, and that's not always going to be the same person because the person who's normally your point of contact may be on vacation or out sick or what have you. Third, ensuring that your county website and your social media, especially Facebook and Twitter, and your email lists are ready to go to serve as information repeaters if needed. That means double check to make sure your Facebook account has liked the New York Eden Facebook account, and that your local Twitter account has followed the Eden Twitter and so forth. And then finally, to familiarize yourself and refamiliarize yourself with the New York Eden website. It is updated and changed and added to quite regularly. Also refamiliarize with the DART Ag Sentinel website, which we'll talk more about later, and the Facebook and Twitter. So those are the things that would need to be happening by someone or some group of persons in each county if we went to yellow. Then let's just continue on with our scenario and say, so the next couple of days are filled with lots of people arguing about where the storm is going to go, but most of the news sources and then the National Weather Service and others are starting to indicate that it's pretty likely that we're going to have some serious impacts in New York State. Well, when we start hearing those messages, and we're following those closely here, it is welcome to level orange time. We're now in an elevated status. Orange, for us here on campus, means we are beginning to seek permission for activation of the Disaster All Hazards Response Team from the director. So what that means is we've got to put together some documentation and justification and prepare a letter that can be sent out under the director's name to all parties and so forth. So we're beginning to ramp the system up because it looks likely that we're going to need to. And that also means that we're activating our system-wide standard operating procedures, which we'll be happy to share with you. It'd take its entire webinar of its own to go through that, and perhaps sometime we'll do that. But we're happy to share that guidance with anybody that's interested in seeing it. And third, we begin to liaise with our state agencies in support of their incident command structures, which they're standing up at this time, generally speaking. And again, mostly we're going to be working directly with partners in Ag and Markets and in DEC. What should the counties be doing when we are going to orange? One of the first things that should be done is to notify the County Office of Emergency Management that you're up, that you're ready to go to support them for the incident in the ways that Cornell Cooperative Extension, only Cornell Cooperative Extension can. And in some cases, the county OEM was going to request someone from CCE to assist in staffing their Emergency Operations Center, especially for ag expertise and other sorts of expertise that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so it's important to try to figure out how you might contribute to that staffing plan. And then second, when we've gone to orange, is to notify us that you're up, that you've got somebody that you're going to have in the Emergency Operations Center and so forth, so that all the communication is open. And so that if somebody were to ask us, hey, is there anybody in XYZ County in the Ops Center, we can say, yes, there is, and this is who it is. And then third, start the process of reposting and sharing and retweeting information that's coming from here. And, you know, this is hopefully easy for the county associations to take advantage of, because we're basically sending out tailor-made products that you can easily repost, retweet, share, or what have you, so you don't have to spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel. Now, if you want to customize those for your communities, you're more than welcome to do that. And if you have the time and the staff to do it, I encourage it. But it's not necessary. You could just directly repost, retweet, and so forth. Finally, you're going to want to, in orange, assign an Ag Sentinel. And this may be an additional role for whoever your Eden incident point of contact is, or it might be another individual like your Ag educator or Ag program leader. And this person needs to be identified, and we need to know who that is in case we do go to level red, because one of the things that we will certainly be asked for from New York State Ag and Markets is some reporting from these Ag Sentinels. Okay, so moving along in our scenario now, we see this thing is really happening. We're watching live coverage on the news of bad things happening along the coast and wind damage and all this kind of stuff is going on, and we're hearing declarations of disaster from politicians in multiple counties, from the governor, maybe the mayor in New York City. We hear that FEMA is going to declare it's on. This disaster is happening. So now we're at level red. What are things that are going on here on campus and should be going on in the counties when we're in level red, high risk? Well, here on campus, we're doing a few more things. We've activated our level red standard operating procedures, and that includes a process of identifying some key faculty and other technical experts that we know we're going to need to include specifically for this particular incident, and it's going to be different many times. We've also dedicated some CCE administrative support, a team dedicated to helping assist with this incident reporting. That's part of our standard operating procedure. And we're establishing regular communications with those impacted county associations to make sure that they're doing okay, that their infrastructure is surviving, or if it isn't, what they might need, and so forth. Just trying to make sure that there's an open line of communication for that. Fourth, we're beginning to create periodic situation reports to both our own administration here at Cornell and state agencies in support of their incident command structures, and again, that's mostly Ag and Markets and DEC at this time, although we expect that to grow. and developing responses to specific informational requests and technical assistance. Part of that number 5 does also include trying to get out some media response, and sometimes that will be press releases that can be used locally. Sometimes that's going to be sort of larger press releases or commentary on the disaster, and so there's a lot of activity here on campus when things go to red, and presumably there is a lot of activity also in the county associations, especially the ones being directly affected, but not only them. So what should associations be doing during high-risk red period? First, I think the most important thing is to notify Eden, which has now become DART, of the status of your association staff and your infrastructure. We've learned a lot since Irene and Lee about the importance of that and the importance of having those lines of communication open, and we have prioritized that for number 1 in terms of what we're waiting to hear and what we're reaching out to find out when we've gone to that level. Number 2, we would like for you to be continuing the reposting and sharing and retweeting information. That's going to be coming out of here and going to those social media sites, number 1, because that's the fastest way for it to be retransmitted. Number 2, we don't want to clog up our disaster listserv email with those kinds of communications when those emails might be needed for other kinds of communications, or there might be a significant portion of people in the state, including faculty, who are not involved in the disaster and don't need to be getting these kinds of updates every 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. Third, you should be then using that Ag Sentinel that you identified to conduct assessments and do some reporting during and immediately following the disaster, but they need to be doing this safely. We're not asking Ag educators to become first responders and risk their lives or their safety to take photographs of flooded fields. You can easily get a lot of the information that's going to be needed for this situation reporting by phone or email or at the coffee shop. We're basically looking for snapshot situational awareness of what's occurring to the agriculture sector right during and after the disaster. Now, if conditions are safe enough for people to go out and do first-hand observations, that's great. We love the photographs that we've got in the past and even a little bit of video, first-hand reporting. It's really useful for the people, for us here, to understand what kind of experts we need to be asking and lining up for fact sheets and whatnot, but also very useful for Ag and Markets to be able to report this up their chain of command. And so we are now at that point, we're looking here at the red zone in this disaster cycle, and before we move on to the aftermath piece, I want to just mention the importance of all this reporting and these standard operating procedures. When the state has declared an emergency and has activated its Emergency Operations Center, it is a ready room that looks like what you might imagine from the movies, maybe at the Pentagon or at the Department of Defense or something like this, with lots of screens, lots of activity, lots of little cubicles with various agencies all humming away doing their work, and there's somebody in charge of all that, and that somebody who's in charge would like to sometimes find out what's happening to Sector X. And whenever they ask for information about the Ag sector or the Natural Resources sector, in the past, it was sort of like, those offices might have to check the internet real quick and see what's being reported and come up with something. More recently, they're able to, thanks to the Ag Sentinel program and some of the great work that Extension's been doing in the counties with, unfortunately, too many disasters in the last few years, they're now able to look to Cooperative Extension to help populate a report. And now, with Ag Sentinel, that report is actually shown with some software that we're developing here, web presence, right on the monitors in there. And that disaster incident commander in the State Emergency Operations Center is able to see firsthand what's going on, thanks to Cornell Cooperative Extension and our Ag Sentinels. So here we are in the red zone here. We've just talked through a kind of response for Eden. There's including some assessment and some immediate relief hopefully will come about as a result of that reporting, although we're not directly involved in that relief, although certainly have been and can be in some contexts. And then we find ourselves moving out of that and taking a deep breath and thinking about rehabilitation and reconstruction. For Eden 101, we're not going to spend a lot of time in what we should be doing with rehabilitation and reconstruction. In all likelihood, we need to do an Eden 102, which deals directly with what we do in terms of Cornell Cooperative Extension in that period of rehabilitation and reconstruction when FEMA comes to town and is ready to do the community response kinds of activities. That is a whole other set of challenges for us to all work through, and I look forward to working through those challenges with you, but we're not going to go into much depth on that now, other than to say that in principle, Cornell Cooperative Extension would be deeply involved in that phase, leading to the beginning of the cycle again, leading to education and outreach around prevention, mitigation, and preparedness, all under the umbrella of capacity building. So we've come full circle in our scenario now, and now I would like to just share with you a couple of the tools a little more in depth that I've mentioned in passing along these various phases or stages or levels of response from Eden. First are the communication tools. I've talked about the listserv. That's still an active way to get information out, although it's not meant to be sort of a flash tool where, you know, every 5 or 10 minutes there's new information coming out. We want to be respectful of those members of that list who are not being impacted and don't need, you know, regular updates about what road is flooded and what not. Also, you have the emails coming from disaster@cornell.edu, cornell.edu, and you can reply to those, and they go to the disaster box where everybody who is on the Eden Advisory Committee, then later the DART, can have a look at those and respond to them as needed, so we have good communications there. We have the Twitter account, which we've talked about, which we encourage you, if you have Twitter in your association, to go to ours and follow us so that you receive these updates when they come about during the disaster period, and also a Facebook page.
Hey, Keith.
Yo.
Lisa here. I just wanted to mention that I'm doing a Twitter presentation at the ELC on Thursday, and I'm really hoping to get, we have about 20 or 21 associations using Twitter right now, and I'm hoping to get more on board with that, and I'm going to give them a list of suggested entities to follow, and yours will be right up there at the top.
Thank you very much. And, you know, I think that as we go on to what Eden 201 looks like, I think a pretty in-depth course on social media will need to be a part of that, so we should get together on that further and see how to go at the ELC.
Okay.
And then the final, obviously, is our website. The website is a great repository of information. It serves as both a sort of clearinghouse, an encyclopedia, and a central forum for where our Twitter is hosted and Facebook. You can get everything that is Eden from that website. If you're ever forgetting the Twitter or you're forgetting the Facebook, it's all there. It's all being updated and made relevant. Often one example, or two examples, we had the incident in Russia not too long ago where a meteorite or asteroid or whatever it was hit, and we got a lot of questions about what do we do if that kind of disaster befalls us. So we have now on our Eden website content for what to do. I don't know how you prepare for that, but we certainly have a way to, some information on how to react to a situation like that. And then more seriously, there was not too long ago in Herkimer a active shooter incident where there were a number of questions about what one does. Now, that's a pretty limited scale, and thankfully that didn't become what one would consider a disaster, but it was certainly an emergency, and it caused a significant amount of panic in an area. And so we rapidly worked with experts on campus and others to create some fact sheets around the active shooter scenario, and identified training through the FEMA Emergency Management Institute that anybody can take and be certified in active shooter, and I would certainly encourage members of associations to start taking some of those trainings. Otherwise, in tools, now these are really small, and I apologize for this. These are just examples. You don't really need to really see exactly what's there. Just know that these forms exist. On the left, this is for the Ag Damage Assessment and Reporting under Ag Sentinel. On the left is an example of a sheet, basically a form, which is your Ag Assessment Emergency Reporting form. It's very straightforward. It's your snapshot of what's happening in your community, and it's what you use to formulate your report that goes through this Ag Sentinel reporting system. On the right, you see basically a screenshot of the kind of beta version of the Ag Sentinel dashboard, which is online in real-time, password protected, showing the information. You see there's a couple of county seals on the left, and you see some status of some counties is red, some is yellow, and then there's places to put in those assessments, add those PDFs right into this thing, add video, add photographs or what have you. And this is going to be a very handy tool for people, let's say, for example, at Ag and Markets, to be able to log onto this and look and get a sense from us how things are going. And we're going to do a specific training around the Ag Sentinel program and Ag damage assessment at a later date. Also, I wanted to make sure in wrapping this up to give you some other things to study up on from the Journal of Extension. There are a number of, and these are just a couple of them, there are a number of publications dealing with cooperative extension's role in disaster preparedness, extension's role during a disaster in terms of response, and extension's role in terms of communication and recovery. These are great articles to read, and you can get a sense of how other states have been dealing with those kinds of issues. I think we're due to add to that collection for the Journal of Extension based on our experiences in New York soon. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about benefits. Why are we going through this? Obviously you're here doing Eden 101 because you'd like to know what's going on and how it might help you. I think it's important to point this set of factors out. This is a really awesome opportunity to dramatically demonstrate a vital role for Cornell Cooperative Extension in your counties. It's a community role that is visible. It's highly meaningful, especially when you've encountered a disaster, and highly memorable for your community members, stakeholders, decision makers, politicians, etc. And it's as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, it's wholly in keeping with the mission of Cornell Cooperative Extension to be involved in these things. So specifically, it gives you, we feel that Eden has relevance and applications at all phases of the disaster, and we have resources for that. As I've mentioned, we have a number of electronic resources, not only coming out of our state here, but also federally. And I want to point out again that the Extension Disaster Education Network nationally includes almost all the land-grant universities in that network and all of their collective knowledge and experience around disaster preparedness and response. All of that is available through Eden. And again, it's a highly visible campus-county connection for stakeholders to be able to observe. And most importantly, the probability of these things continuing to happen is pretty great. In all likelihood, they're going to increase, which means the demand for this kind of programming is going to be there. As I was talking about this talk with somebody who is from another state but involved in extension, I was talking about readiness and response and recovery. They said, "Are you ready for this?" And they showed me this progressive farmer where the big line is "Extension still relevant." And I had to be honest, I really wasn't ready for that question. And but I thought about that, especially in the context of Eden. And I thought, well, it's interesting. That readiness for that question is an important thing to consider. And I feel like the answer is in the affirmative. I am ready for that question now, and I think many of us are when we think about the applicability of Eden, and the idea that extension is highly relevant in this context, I think, is one that we need to hang on to. What I'm going to do now is mention that this says here in the next webinar in the series will be Eden 201 Ag Sentinel. I think in reality we need to do Eden 102, which would be that recovery and response, recovery and rehabilitation and rebuilding phase, because there is a significant role for extension to play during that time, and it's a very murky environment. It's not clear who's partnering with who and who should do what, and how we follow up and not just drop the ball. So we'll be making that change on the fly. With that, thank you very much for your interest and attention in this webinar, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
And you can probably stop recording now, so at least we recorded it just to share with the folks who couldn't be here. As you see, we don't have a lot of our members